All right, a day late and a dollar short. It's kind of my life motto here. It's not a Stephen Lasson Tuesday. It's a Stephen Lasson Wednesday, senior editor over at Athlon Sports. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. How's it going, brother?
Always great to talk to you, Mike. I have to admit, I am a little sad as I talk to you on whatever day it is, because we've reached the end of the college football season. So that means we won't have another game until spring practice. I am curious, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you hate watch the national championship on Monday night?
Well, for obvious reasons, no SEC team included for the first time in this show's existence, but it was compounded, Steve. I mean, I didn't think I could get even more upset, but I was kind of more tuned in to the commercials than I was the actual game because of this. There were multiple reports, Stephen, that the EA Sports College Football was going to make some kind of announcement, a date for the video game. And by the fourth quarter, I was like, this ain't happening, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, I was taking the bathroom breaks while the action was going on. I mean, that was how apathetic I was to the results on the field. It was just, and it was two teams that didn't seem like either one wanted to win the game. Michigan, their first quarter was awesome, but the rest, sloppy play. I was just thinking, man, these teams would never survive in this conference.
It's almost like the way you treated the commercials was my wife during the Super Bowl. She's like, she just wants to watch the halftime. She just wants the Super Bowl. Doesn't matter that the Chiefs, 49ers game is coming down to the end. I'm going to go and take the breaks when the actual teams are playing. Man, I'm with you. I'm fired up for some NCAA football this year on the PS5. So I was a little disappointed we didn't get some more details, but fingers crossed. Maybe that'll keep the off season going for us. We'll be getting these small details as we get closer to the summer and get the actual game released. We'll say on the actual game, how much are you like, if you're Georgia, how much are you kicking yourself today because you just watched those two teams play? I think Michigan and Georgia have been a fun national championship game, but I think if you're Georgia, you probably kind of say, man, we really missed an opportunity for a three-peat this year.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went there because I was going to ask you anyway. You're so level-headed. You're not a hot take artist, and I'm not. This will forever be known as Michigan National Championship. I am the more hot take artist, but even I recognize. I mean, yeah, they cheated, but I don't really care. But they went undefeated. They did it. They beat Alabama when I didn't think they had any chance to beat Alabama. So give credit where credit's due. We'll give the Big Ten, 1 out of every 9 national championships. That's fine. But realistically, Stephen, and again, I know, the other SEC fans, they hate that people even have these conversations. But if we were to remove Washington from that field for whatever reason, they all got COVID. They called up Kirby Smart and says, will you fly up here and play Michigan? I mean, who would have won that game last night? I mean, you tell me.
Georgia. I know, I'm big into analytics and stuff, and you see like ESPN's Bill Connolly has Michigan. I think his analytics had Michigan as the best team in the country this season. But man, give me Georgia. I think it would have been a heck of a national championship game. I think it would have been a lot closer than that Orange Bowl a few years ago. But I thought for most of the season, Georgia was the best team, and you give Georgia time to get Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey healthy. I think they would have won that game and went for the pretty rare three-peat that I think we may not see for a while in college football.
Right. And, you got me thinking already, Steve. And I know we're going to talk your quarterback rankings for 2024 SEC quarterback rankings, early rankings, optimism for every SEC team, some thoughts on a 12-game format and how the SEC is, of course, going to dominate it. But you got me sidetracked already, Stephen, and I do appreciate it because I think this will be a fun conversation. But how does it affect the game in your mind now that we just saw Georgia? They lost one game on a neutral field by 3 points, and they were eliminated essentially from the national championship race, which in a 12-team format, they clearly would have been in the field. They probably would have been favored to win it. We could sit here and debate whether they would have beaten Michigan or Alabama had they faced them again. We could do that all off season long. we'll never know. But in a new format, Georgia still gets in. So, and it's not just that one result. There's so many I can think of where you slip up just one time in the BCS era or even before the BCS, and there goes that elusive national championship. Does it hurt the game that, this has kind of been debated a lot too. Just the stakes and everything like that. Does it hurt that teams like Georgia will be? I don't want to call it a mulligan, but they'll be allowed to screw up one time by 3 points and still have an opportunity. Does it help or hurt the game of college football in this new 12-team format? What's your thoughts?
I'm going to give you a little bit of a bad answer here, but I really think it kind of depends on your perspective. I personally love the idea of the regular season meaning everything. So in this case, even though I like Georgia as the best team in college football, I love the fact that, hey, the regular season, you play your 12 games, you play the conference championship game, the committee subjectively figures out the top four. Every week is sort of an elimination week. To me, like, your end goal is the national championship. The path during the regular season sort of eliminates. It's sort of an ongoing playoff during the season. I think the flip side of that is, and I think I'm not too big on reading too much into the TV ratings and all that, but there were a lot of people who were interested in that game last night who were probably just excited to have somebody not from the SEC in the game, and the ratings are pretty good. And I think that kind of goes into the 12-team playoff era, which is, it sort of sells false hope. Because, like, for instance, like, Liberty would have been the group of 5 champion this year. I don't think Liberty could have gone through the entire college football playoff and beaten teams like Georgia and Alabama and Michigan. It would have been one of the greatest playoff runs if they could. But that also, if you're, Georgia, you would have more mulligans. And I think that's sort of, as we look ahead to the 12-team playoff era and the new 16-team SEC, I think if you're on the fence about it, the one positive is your teams have more opportunities to lose, and they also have more opportunities to win. And I think this also gets at something else, which is, in this format, I think this new format will benefit teams, especially like Georgia and Alabama, probably more than maybe these years where they were able to get a mulligan. Deeper teams like Georgia and Alabama, stacked with roster talent, can probably overcome some of the obstacles a little bit easier than some of the other teams. So I think, I know we'll probably get more into this, but in a 12-team playoff era, you get more mulligans, but also I think you're probably feeding into the SEC championship run, I think.
And do you think fans in this 12-team model, Stephen, will be more interested in winning an SEC championship or punching their ticket to the 12-team playoff?
Man, that's a really good question. I kind of think maybe the 12-team playoff. And let me give you an example. And I think there are some flaws with the 12-team playoff. I think the fact that you have to be a champion to be in the top 4 is complete nonsense. I think it should be the top 4, and we should have games on campus sites, like actually using home field advantage, like the best things about college football, the home stadiums, the crowds, all that stuff. If we were to use this year's rankings, Georgia would be the number 6 seed overall in the playoff. The highest SEC team would be Alabama at number 4. Washington and Texas would be 2, 3, and Michigan would be 1. But you also get Georgia at 6, you get Missouri at 9, Ole Miss at 11, which sets Georgia and Ole Miss up to play in the first round if you use this year's rankings. But it also gets at the broader path, which is it gets pretty favorable for those teams that could fall. So if you're a Georgia team that loses and you get the 5 seed, you get the 6 seed, your path gets pretty favorable because you would end up playing some team like Utah or an Arizona as the Big 12 champion next year if they're the 3 or the 4. So I know that it may be a little bit hard to follow, but I think if you think about long term, I think the SEC championship is super important. But if you lose it, there's still an opportunity to win a national championship because of how favorable some of these matchups could be.
Yeah, so the next time Nick Saban loses an SEC championship, I'll just wait for him to come out and say, "This is chess, not checkers."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Our path to the championship just cleared up a little.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's if I was Georgia and looking ahead to like this year's format and potentially down the road, and I think that's to me the biggest flaw in all of it is still the conference champions at the top four. I mean, I looking at my early rankings for 2024, I think the top three teams are from the SEC. Well, that would mean that two of those three would be seeded 5 and 6 in the playoff, which is not ideal, but at the same time, it might work out in their favor. So I guess chess, not checkers. If you're one of those teams that gets favorable seeding, you could, in theory, lose the SEC championship in your path. May not necessarily get more difficult.
And with the Pac-12 demise, which I know it sounds like they may keep that name around and just it might be the Mountain West, or I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't really care, Stephen. But the point being is, I would assume, and to my knowledge, they've not determined this. That's why I really wanted to ask you how they're going to do it with who gets automatic berths, who doesn't. And I know Greg Sankey is pushing for, why are we even doing automatic berths? Let's just do the 12 best, what have you. And of course, it's probably going to have 8 or 9 SEC teams in there. So I understand why he's pushing for that. But what's the latest on the format and how they're all going to do all that?
Yeah, so there's still some uncertainty about the actual format. And I think it's important to keep in mind that what happens in 2024 and 2025 may not be what happens in 2026 because all the TV contracts are up. There's still the conference realignment changes. The actual format could change for 2026, and that could mean the conference champion thing that you and I are kind of talking about here. But as far as for next season in 2024, right now it's still 2025. Sorry, it's still 6 and 6. It's 6 conference champions, 6 at-large teams. There's a thought that they are going to switch that to 5 conference champions and 7 at-large spots. It's not done. That's where it's trending because of the way things have gone in the Pac-12. Basically, eliminate a conference, so you eliminate one of the automatic bids. It's some of the reporting this week indicated it could have happened when they had meetings at I think in Dallas this week. It didn't happen. My guess is that's where it ends up, and that we'll just have 5 automatics and 7 at-large spots. Which, if you're a fan of any SEC team, that's probably good news for 2024 and 2025. But the bigger chess match is happening for 2026 because I think there could be some other changes down the road.
Right, and I'm sure you caught this, Stephen, last night during the national championship game. ESPN, some of their reporters, conveniently, I don't know how they found out this information, Stephen, but they said ESPN looks like they're going to be keeping the college football playoff. ESPN sources told ESPN reporter. So again, this is leaked information for sure. And I don't know if it's accurate or not. Maybe they put that out there so Fox or whoever doesn't up their ante. But let's not be naive, Stephen. With the SEC arm in arm with the ESPN, I have to believe that's probably good news for the SEC. Because if there is going to be a tiebreaker. I got to believe it's going to be our network partner that's going to maybe catch that the 6th, 7th playoff spot. Would you believe, do you see where I'm going with that? And would you agree? Or do you think the TV rights holder will have no effect on playoff selections and seedings and things of that nature?
I'm always down for a good conspiracy theory that's harmless. I tend to think they probably won't have too much of an effect on the seeding. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of the playoff committee in the way it's constructed. I get very frustrated when I see them complain about the criticism that they faced. If you can't handle the criticism, don't be on the playoff committee. I understand there were a lot of threats from the Florida State this year. That's a little different. If you can't handle the criticism, don't be on the committee. I would personally change that, and I would also put more transparency, especially when it comes to some of the data that they use, so that way we're all a little bit more in the know. But I don't think it'll have too much impact as far as like ESPN and who owns it. I will just add this too. That story could have broke at any point on Monday. It didn't have to break right as the game started. So that was mildly frustrating. But also, I would just say this. If you're a college football fan, you're worried about SEC, ESPN synergy, you can't say that Fox needs to own the college football playoff because Fox is arm in arm with the Big Ten. Like there's no like it's equivalent here. So yeah, I don't think it'll play any role, but it's going to make for some interesting conspiracy theories, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. So go projecting ahead. I'm not sitting here asking you obviously to project the playoff field because who knows? We don't even know the rosters. There's going to be some coach movement more than likely. All the speculation is Jim Harbaugh is going to leave Michigan, and why SEC fans should care. Obviously, there's been Brian Kelly rumors, but usually when there's that much rumors, that probably means they're eyeing another candidate that they don't want eyes on that one. So who knows? But there could be dominoes, or they may just promote from within and there'll be no drama. But you just never know. But really, what I wanted to ask you, Stephen, this 12-team format, could you see the SEC dominating right off the bat? Because I could make the case, given what I know about Michigan and not only their coach, but a lot of the players leaving. I don't even know if Michigan's a playoff team next year. So, what's your thoughts on all that?
I agree with you. So I know you didn't ask me to project the playoff, but I did come prepared using my very early 2024 rankings, which are guaranteed to be 100% wrong. I have 5 SEC teams making the top 12. It starts with Georgia at 1 as the projected SEC champion. Alabama at 5 and 6, even though they're 2 and 3 in my national rankings, they would fall to 5 and 6 because they are not conference champions. Ole Miss and Missouri at 9 and 10. This gets at the kind of the discussion about the conference champions. If you seed this out, your second seed would be a rebuilt Michigan team at 2, if you believe they're the front runner to win the Big Ten. Utah, projected Big 12 champion, which I have in the 15 to 20 range, and the same thing for Clemson as the projected ACC champion. So you're talking about going from Georgia and Michigan, which are going to be preseason top 5 teams, to a drop off to your Big 12 and ACC champs and your group of 5 champs. So that's kind of gets at the path part of this, which is Alabama and Texas are going to be way underseeded at 5 and 6 if this holds true, which sets them up to play Liberty and Penn State in these highly accurate, very early rankings for the playoff.
Yeah, so it's almost like a gimme to the second round for some of these. I mean, the SEC fans aren't going to complain about that, but yeah, I don't know. Already, Stephen, it sounds like they've made a mess of this new format, and I think we're going to have to be cleaning it up before long. But I have seen they put it out. I think it's like December 19th, December 20th. 2-day range. There's going to be about 4 games there, and then a week later, then a week later, and then a week. I mean, this is going to be a month of playoff action here. Man, it's because that's the only thing I don't like about the 4-team. It seems like we wait and wait and wait, and then it's here, and then it's like it's done in a week. It comes and goes so quickly.
Yeah, it really does. And I think it also begs the question to what you and I talked about last week, which is what do you do with all this other stuff in college football? What do you do with early signing day? What do you do with transfers, the NFL draft deadline? You have other bowl games, you have coaching changes. All of this is getting way more complicated next season. So I don't know what the answer is. I like the idea of having more football on, more college football in January. That's never a bad thing. But the season is definitely going to be longer, and probably the personnel coaching aspect gets somewhat more complicated because of how long the season is going to be now.
Right. Yeah. So we're entering a new world, Stephen. We don't even know it yet. So I can't wait for that. Now, I know you wanted to talk quarterback rankings, early quarterback rankings. We don't even know who all is going to be the quarterbacks, and there's probably a few teams here that are still eyeing signal callers to add via the transfer portal. So this will obviously change between now and then, but it's never too early to talk quarterback rankings and things of that nature. So what have you got geared up for what could be a historic season in the SEC when it comes to passers, with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, and Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma? It's just the rich get richer at the quarterback position in the SEC.
Yeah, this is going to be a great year for quarterbacks in the SEC. I think there's a good mix of proven signal callers, young up and coming quarterbacks like a Jackson Arnold, Nico at Tennessee. Who I know Mike is very excited about for next season. And you got guys like Jalen Milroe who are going to take a big step forward next season. So I think just the overall collection of quarterbacks, it's really interesting and it's deep. And the one thing that kind of caught my attention is putting this list together is, what do you do with some guys? And I know it's early. Like, what do you do with a Peyton Thorne? What do you do with someone like Graham Mertz, who is very good this year? But can he take that next step forward? If at this point of the offseason where we're just desperate for conversation, is Jackson Arnold, would you rank Jackson Arnold ahead of Graham Mertz? Maybe not now, but maybe as we get into spring ball, maybe we see Jackson Arnold's development a little bit more. But man, bottom line is this is a great group of quarterbacks coming back next year. That's one of the reasons why I can't wait for next season is good quarterback play should be pretty much everywhere in the SEC.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about we start at the bottom of the list, just so you can fire up some SEC fans right off the dock here.
Let's go with Nate Johnson and Blaise Berlowitz from Vanderbilt. Two transfers Vanderbilt is going to be relying on. I will say I was impressed by Berlowitz when he played in the Conference USA Championship game against Liberty, I think it was, and he saw a little bit of spot action for New Mexico State this year, but obviously a big jump to the SEC. Nate Johnson at Utah was more of a runner. We'll have to see if he can develop a little bit more as a passer, but like the addition of Tim Beck as Vanderbilt's offensive coordinator, it's a pretty nice pickup for Clark Lee. Still 16th in the early quarterback power rankings.
16th Vanderbilt. I mean, that's they just seem destined to be there for the time being. You know what?
They did. I don't say this to be snarky. They picked up a good punter last week, Jesse Miraco from Ohio State. And I think that could be pretty valuable for a, I know this sounds terrible. I think it could be valuable for a team that's going to need to play some field position as the offense still develops. So they won't be 16th in the punter rankings.
Well, didn't their last punter break the all-time record for punts or something like that?
Yeah, Matt Hayball was an awesome punter at Vanderbilt, and Jesse Miraco should be one of the better ones in the SEC next year too.
They got a lot of reps down there in Nashville.
Just copying Iowa's punt to win.
That's perfect. All right, who you got next on your list here?
I've got Blake Shapen at Mississippi State. I'm curious just how the whole Mississippi State offense comes together under Jeff Lebby in year one. Does it take off? Does it take some time? Shapen was inconsistent at Baylor. You go back and watch him in the Big 12 championship game in 2021. Impressive performance against Oklahoma State, kind of up and down after that. Probably not all of his fault, but going to a new scheme, we'll see how the pieces around him look. So I've got Blake Shapen from Mississippi State at 15 in the way too early rankings.
Yeah, and I could certainly see him rising given Jeff Lebby's track record with quarterbacks and the great job he's done developing those guys. They're adding a lot of weapons on the outside for him, and I've seen, they're really killing it in the transfer portal on the offensive line. But, to your point, it's going to be difficult to mesh all these pieces in a new system, new conference, so many new things. They'll need a lot to click right off the bat to rise up these rankings. But I'd be a lot more optimistic if I'm a Mississippi State fan today than I was a couple months ago.
For sure. The portal haul, if nothing else, the volume and the capable players they seem to have brought in should make this team more competitive and certainly be able to transition offenses quickly. One under the radar pickup, Kelly Akari, the receiver they got from UTEP. Anytime you go from Conference USA to the SEC, there's going to be a question of level of competition. But he averaged, I think, 22 yards per catch one year. And you just talk about deep threats, being able to open it up. A lot of these offenses are predicated on defending every blade of grass, throw it as deep as you can a couple times to sort of set up some other things. He was impressive at UTEP. So someone like that could be a good little pickup for Blake Shapen and Jeff Lebby as they try to quickly mold this offense in 2024.
Mm-hmm. So who's 14th on your list?
I've got Taylon Green / Jacoby Criswell. at Arkansas. I will say there is a Petrino factor that made me consider bumping the Arkansas quarterback group up some. Taylor Green was impressive at Boise State at times, over 1,000 yards rushing, a little bit inconsistent as a passer, 15 interceptions over 2 years. I think the optimism here ought to be Petrino's work with Jalen Henderson, kind of taking a quarterback with some question marks, using the mobility, molding him into something successful quickly. That would be the argument maybe for Taylor Green to become successful right away in the SEC. Same thing for Jacoby Criswell, but obviously Arkansas's offensive line has to get a lot better for this to click.
Yeah, and what I just noticed, just off the top of my head, Stephen, these are kind of the teams right now, the three we've covered, projected to be kind of the worst in the worst. Maybe that's not the right word, but just kind of at the bottom of the SEC. Do you think that is tied a lot to the quarterback position? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of it. And also, I think interesting that all three of these are transfers. Is, kind of, I think the element of the unknown, but also the element of potential here for some of these teams. I mean, Vanderbilt has probably more questions than anybody, but I think if Shapen and Taylor Green hit for those two teams, I think those kind of teams are kind of tied together in the rankings. You could easily see them moving up a few spots if the quarterbacks hit. And especially as we get into this list, there are some names above them that have question marks too.
You're right. So who's number 13?
I've got Lenoris Sellers from South Carolina. This kind of gets into the potential category if you're kind of trying to figure out this list. Really liked what I saw out of him in the game against Furman. We just don't have a very large sample size. And also, I think from a supporting cast standpoint, Rocket Sanders coming in. Jared Brown from Coastal Carolina is another under the radar pickup I really like. He kind of was an all-purpose playmaker at Coastal Carolina. So I think the supporting cast will be better. Just a lot of unknowns at this point. So that's why I've got him 13th.
Yeah, maybe some parallels. They may not like to hear this, but I was always high on him. Some parallels to KJ, maybe. Yeah. Dow Loggins, the familiarity there. You mentioned Rocket Sanders, obviously, and Trey Knox was there last year. So I mean, there's a track record of that Arkansas translation to South Carolina. So I know it's not apples to apples, but that's kind of what little we've seen of Sellers. It looks very promising.
For sure. And I think that this also gets at the other challenge for this list is if you were to list all these quarterbacks nationally, I mean, I know Sellers is unproven and some of the other guys ahead of him we'll get to in just a moment, but these are all like above average, probably quarterbacks in college football that you could probably, the only one I think you could say has big question marks is probably Vanderbilt at this point. Like Shapen's a proven Power 5 quarterback. And if you're Arkansas, you have two guys who have played a lot at the college level. And Sellers that could easily be higher on this list just based upon potential too.
Right. All right. So who's next?
Brock Vandegrift, another quarterback that's hard to rank. I've got him 12th here. Obviously, the potential word, potential coming out of high school, but just 21 career pass attempts. So I like, obviously Liam Cohen's track record. I think the offense with the receivers that they have, there is a lot to like here for Kentucky. Kind of the same thing with Sellers, and I hate to sound like a broken record. It's just unknown at this point, so that's why he's 12th.
Right. I mean, I realize Kentucky, they're going to expect the world from this guy, 5-star, all the hype that comes with it, teaming with Liam Cohen. But I mean, I think if they're being truly realistic, I think the path for a guy like Vandegrift, who's not barely played, to your point, is, again, this is going to sound crazy because I'm saying be realistic, but like Joe Burrow, Hendon Hooker, I know Matt Corral wasn't a transfer, but first year under Lane Kiffin, and then it was year 2 where these guys really take off. I think that's the path, and that doesn't mean Kentucky's going to be awful next year, but I mean, I don't think you should come in and be like, well, this guy's top 3 quarterback, no doubt. But he could be in year 2 in this system. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's also fair, I think, to point out that he's coming to Kentucky with less experience than Will Levis or Devin Leary did. Those two quarterbacks were more proven. Leary, certainly from a starter standpoint, Levis kind of was in and out at Penn State, had a lot of untapped potential. he's more of an unknown. I think what would give you confidence is, to your point, you've got an offensive line that is going to be bringing back some seniors that could have left. You've also got a running back in Chip Trainium who was good at Ohio State, and you've got good receivers. Pretty much, it's almost like last year. There's a good foundation for a good quarterback. There's just the element of the unknown, but also like his upside gives you a chance to sort of slow build this year as you get and kind of work him in. But I think the upside is interesting. It's just a question of how fast and can he reach that potential.
And let me ask you this, Stevie, because I know you're not responsible for this, but I heard a lot of coaches, I heard a lot of plugged in fans. They were telling me, "My God, you should hear these reports we're getting out of from Devin Leary. Like he's going to be elite." Because I put him like 8th in my quarterback rankings, and they were like, "By God, you're a damn fool for this low." You know what I mean? I think they would have been happy had he been that high. I don't think he was close to it. And that's 2 quarterbacks in a row. And we don't have to rehash Will Levis stuff, but you know, that's well documented. But it is what it is. This is two quarterbacks in a row where Kentucky would tell you they got a top quarterback, and 2 years in a row, for various reasons, it has not translated to the field. Is that a cause for concern at all? Or is it, you know, maybe Devin Leary was a hell of a practice player, and then because I'm not even saying just SEC scared him, because I didn't think at any point really during his time at Kentucky, I mean, right out the gate they were playing cupcakes. I thought he looked average. I mean, does it concern you that they misread that so bad? And again, there may have been factors, there may have been injuries that I'm unaware of, but does that concern you at all?
A little bit. I think for Leary specifically, the fact that he had such a season-ending injury at NC State the year before, I'm guessing may have played into that some. That's just me just kind of speculating. The other part of that is it really is interesting when you look back at Kentucky's like quarterback history and just see how many transfers, how many sort of, I guess, misses that they've had. Probably the good reason why Liam Cohen's the offensive coordinator now and did a good job with developing Will Levis. But I think very broadly, I think in this era, you can probably continue to do the quarterback roulette from the portal thing. I think at some point it probably would be nice to develop your own guy. I think this Vandergrift will be a good test for us to kind of gauge a little bit more where they are, because I think Levis, wasn't the full-time starter at Penn State. He got better at Kentucky. How much did he reach the potential we all thought at some point? I think that's fair to debate.
Mm-hmm.
Devin Leary didn't this year. So I think it's fair to have some questions or doubts about whether or not they can get Brock Vandegrift's talent maximized.
Yeah. All right. This turned into a Kentucky show. Who you got next on here, Stephen?
I got Peyton Thorne from Auburn, and he's a hard quarterback to rank. If you look just on the stat sheet, 6.4 yards per attempt in SEC games, was 12th in the conference. Not to mention, I think if you look at teams that probably need to be dipping into the portal for help at quarterback, Auburn's probably top of the list. So he gets the 11th spot largely because he's a little bit more proven than the guys behind him. But if you wanted to bank on potential and put him 14 or so, I really wouldn't disagree with you. The one thing that did surprise me about Peyton Thorne probably was how much he was used as a rusher, because he really wasn't at Michigan State. He had a nice year rushing the ball for Auburn.
Yeah, and he'll be an interesting case, Stevie, because Philip Montgomery, he had a strong track record of developing quarterbacks. He is obviously gone, fired, even though they don't call it fired anymore. It's mutual parting. I mean, I don't know what the hell that means. But now Hugh Freeze, he's come out and said, hey, I'm calling the plays. So it's on you, Hugh. You better be good. But could it be a situation where maybe that was the issue that Hugh Freeze had with Montgomery? Maybe the quarterback coaching. And I don't know who specifically the quarterback coach is going to be. They'll probably hire one, but I'm almost certain it was Philip Montgomery last year. Maybe a new quarterback coach. Maybe we get a lot more out of Peyton Thorne. Could you see that?
I think that's fair. I think the other part of that is receivers. I think if you're Auburn, like you got to figure out how to get receivers, quarterback on the same page, and also receiver production, whether that's just simple production in the game, drop passes, big plays, whatever it is. Auburn needs more of that this season. That's one of the reasons, obviously, why they dipped into the portal for help. The whole Auburn situation to me is fascinating because it seems like to me that Montgomery on the surface is kind of the scapegoat for all the struggles this year. So it really will be on obviously Hugh Freeze to, if this offense doesn't click next year, it's on him. So I'll be curious to see where this team goes in the portal for the rest of the offseason. Keep in mind, spring practice portal after could be pretty active again too. It was last year. There'll be some more quarterbacks that don't win starting jobs who could look to move around and could be more skill players too. So I would think if you're Auburn and you're hoping that they go get a quarterback and they don't land one right now, I wouldn't get too worried yet. There's going to be some shuffling after spring ball for quarterbacks, I think.
Yeah, two coordinators fired in a span of 2 business days.
Yeah.
Business as usual. No, nothing to see here. You know what?
Right. Yeah. Man, after a stellar showing in the Music City Bowl and I mean, it really, it really is funny to look back at the season for Auburn and see they took Georgia and Alabama to the break, but had so many games that just made no sense. I'm not sure what to make of them for next year. Obviously, the accumulation of talent is nice, but without more quarterback play and certainly better play from Peyton Thorne, it's hard to see this team getting better in the win column next year.
That's what we call the Hugh Freeze experience. Wild swings up and down. You know what?
Right. I think that's a fair way to sum up this season. Yeah.
All right, we're into the top 10 now, right, Steven?
We have, and we'll go with another upside play here, and that is Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma. Again, I think worth noting, if he's the 10th best quarterback in the SEC, he's probably somewhere in the top 20, top 25. I liked what I saw of Jackson Arnold in the Alamo Bowl. I know he turned the ball over a couple times, but guy making his first start, all the physical tools are there. Oklahoma skill talent, receiver, running back's going to be good. A little bit of question marks in the offensive line, but man, from an upside standpoint, if you're Oklahoma, I think you've got to be excited about Jackson Arnold next season. He's just 10th just because he's an unknown at this point.
Right, and I don't want to equate the two because one had a bad year, and you're certainly hoping if you're a Sooner that it's not the same. But Spencer Rattler, who you know all about, if you're an Oklahoma fan, I mean, I thought he had a hell of a year for South Carolina, but that offensive line was getting him killed, and by the end of the season, they just kind of ran out of gas. So you better hope it's not quite like that as you get your introductory into the SEC with an unproven offensive line.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if you're Oklahoma, that's probably the thing that keeps you up at night is you can't hide your offensive line in the SEC. You could probably do that in the Big 12, or at least maybe you could win a few more games around it. But in the SEC with that schedule that Oklahoma has, there's going to be no hiding that offensive line if it struggles. So I will say this though, on the offensive line for Oklahoma, Bill Bedenbaugh is one of the best offensive line coaches in the nation. As far as development, getting consistent play out of the line, it is a question, but I think you add in Seth Luttrell taking over play calling duties. He's a guy with a ton of experience. I think Oklahoma's going to be fine offensively. It may take Jackson Arnold a couple weeks to settle in, but as long as they get decent play out of that offensive line too.
Right. All right. So who you got number 9?
Graham Mertz. He was a hard quarterback to rank because I do wonder what the upside is for next season. And of course, if he struggles, there's this 5-star quarterback waiting in the wings to take over. But I think as far as quarterbacks that exceeded expectations in the preseason, Graham Mertz was it. I mean, completed 73% of his passes after an up and down debut against Utah, kind of stabilized. I thought played pretty well this season, only a handful of interceptions. So I think he was way more than what Florida fans probably expected in the preseason. So that puts him about 9th. He could be a little higher because he's probably more proven than some of the guys ahead of him. Also, you could make a case he could be a spot lower because of Jackson Arnold too.
Yeah, and much like I said with Vandegrift, I mean, year 2 in the system, naturally progression, working with Billy Napier. So I think if I'm an optimistic Florida fan, and there's probably not too many of you out there at this moment, but if you are, I mean, I can make the case Graham Mertz would be a lot higher on this list by the end of the season.
Yeah, and to say something that I've used now a couple times, but if Graham Mertz is the ninth best quarterback in the SEC, he's somewhere probably in the top 25 for next year. But also, I think from a supporting cast standpoint, like getting guys like Eugene Wilson, Arlis Boardingham, the young skill players. I know Trevor Etienne transferred, but there is some promising talent there for Florida. Plus, the idea that he could take a year one to year two jump in that system. So like I said, I think exceeded expectations in year one. I'll be curious to see what kind of jump he can make in year two.
Mm. Man, we're getting into some good quarterbacks already, Steven. So I'm curious to know who's next.
Connor Wigman, Texas A&M at number 8. A guy, I should probably say this too. When I did this list, I kind of did them. It was a few that was easy to slot in at the top, and I got to the middle, and I shuffled these names around a few times, and we've reached that point. Like Wigman could be 5 or 6 on potential, but he could also be 10 based upon returning production. But I think if you were just to look at what he did this year, pretty good start to the season, had the performance in Miami where he got beat up, but still had a nice game. And I think that's sort of where I would be if I'm Texas A&M. He's a quarterback with a lot of upside. He just hasn't done it over the course of the full season. But I really like the hire of Colin Klein as the offensive coordinator. I think he's going to get the most out of Connor Wigman. And of course, I think A&M, just from an offensive line, offensive schematic standpoint, I think they'll be just fine. OL will take a little bit of a step forward probably with some better coaching this year too.
Yeah, and I don't know if you factored this in at all, Steven, or even if it's fair to, but tough opening game right out the gate. Notre Dame. It is in College Station at least, but I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to Notre Dame and their defense, but this is a type of game under a new coach, new system. Again, one game's not going to define you, but could really set the tone for a season. How much pressure do you think A&M and I guess Connor Wigman specifically will have to get off to a good start there?
Yeah, it's a great test because the strength of Notre Dame next season is the defense. They gave up about 16 points a game this year, and they're getting some of their seniors that could have left for the NFL to come back next season, potentially 2 or 3 All-Americans on that defense. So Notre Dame versus Connor Wigman will be a heck of a opening week X's and O's battle. And it's also a good chance, I think, kind of for one of those like breakout games for Connor Wigman. Like if he goes out there and stars against Notre Dame, we're probably talking about him as like one of the stars of, September, early part of the season. And I think maybe the rest of the country starts to realize that he's got a lot of potential. And if he taps into it with Colin Klein and they are better on the offensive line, this A&M team, I think, could exceed some preseason expectations.
Yeah. All right, so who you got next on your list here, Steven?
Another upside play here. I've got Garrett Nussmeier of LSU. It is certainly going to be very hard to fill the shoes of Jaden Daniels, but I think just a gunslinger. I mean, we saw it in the bowl game, almost 400 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. I've been impressed every time I've watched him. We'll be curious to see what LSU does from an offensive coordinator standpoint and how that play calling schematically, how it shapes, how it tweaks. But offensive line looks pretty good. LSU's got a couple guys come back at receiver that will at least keep the offense going. I like the upside of Garrett Nussmeier and have him at number 7.
Yeah, and you mentioned the bowl game. I know some people don't give players any credit at all for what they do in a bowl game, but for a guy like him, that's all we have to go on. And I was impressed by the situation, the poise, had to come back, made some big time throws after a shaky start. Had he looked awful, he's probably still their quarterback, but who knows? They may have went to the portal. If he just looked completely in over his head, I'm sure they knew enough about him at that point in time. That's not too realistic, but he looks good. One concern I have for LSU though, Stephen, and I think this will go a little bit overlooked. Maybe not so much now that Logan Diggs hit the portal, but LSU's, I don't know what in the world, their run game has been almost non-existent outside of Jaden Daniels. And maybe that's not fair because he was so dynamic, but I mean, it looked like much of that was not designed. It was improv, and he was tremendous. So, and that certainly does probably take away production from other running backs, but I don't know. There was a lot to be desired. I feel like from the LSU running game, particularly last year.
I think that's fair, and I think as we start to look ahead, I think it is a little shocking when you consider LSU's rushing attack and running backs could be a question considering the historical run that they've had at times in the last whatever 20 years, how many good running backs have come through there, but also on Nussmeier. I mean, even last year at the end of the season against Purdue in the bowl game, against Georgia in the SEC championship game, being thrown into those spots, playing well. I think to your point, very broadly, I think this offseason about LSU is about one thing, and that's fixing the defense. If he had struggled in the bowl game, can you imagine the defense is a question? Now all of a sudden the quarterback's a question. You're adding to your list of concerns if you're Brian Kelly and just the overall angst of the fan base. But I think if you're LSU, you are losing the Heisman Trophy winner, you're losing the best player, but Nussmeier has shown pretty well. There's still the element that he doesn't play well over a course of a full season, but I think what we saw in a very limited sample size would make me encouraged that the offense is still one of the better ones in the SEC next year.
Yeah, and just while you were talking, I just looked up real quick. And again, I don't know how much stock anyone puts into the bowl stats, but 97 rushing yards on 25 attempts. So 3.9 per carry. Not great, not awful, but certainly that's going to be that they need to do a lot better than that.
I think the team around the quarterback's going to have to step up next season because you have to assume they're not going to average 40 something points a game. Even if Nussmeier is the seventh best quarterback in the SEC, defense and running game has to be better for LSU to probably push for the SEC championship game appearance.
Yeah. All right. So who's next on your list there, Steven?
Our guy Brady Cook.
Yeah.
After last season, I mean, to quote Geno Smith, we all wrote him off, and Brady Cook didn't write us back. We all thought that he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the SEC, and all he does is lead Missouri to an 11-win season. Statistically, a great bounce back season, though, and I think just being healthy from the shoulder injury the year before certainly played a part in it. Also, I think Missouri could ask more of Brady Cook next year. And I think because of some of the losses that they have on defense, Blake Baker's gone to LSU, Luther Burden, Theo Wease is back, no Cody Schrader. I think you could ask more out of Brady Cook. So I think from just a production standpoint next year, year two under Kirby Moore, I like Brady Cook to be statistically more productive next season. And again, if he's the sixth best quarterback, you're probably looking at top 15 nationally.
Right. And he's another perfect example of a guy in a year two system. So Kirby Moore, year two, I mean, he did wonders for that entire program, but obviously the offense led the way there with some of the pass catchers that are back, some additions they made on the offensive line, and running back via the portal. Obviously going to lose Schrader, but yeah, I mean Brady Cook could be one of the best in the SEC, if not the country, next year.
Oh, no question about it. I think probably a little unrealistic to say Heisman Trophy candidate, but Jaden Daniels went from, whatever middle of the pack SEC quarterbacks to Heisman winner this year. It's a lot to ask, but I think as we've talked about the 12-team playoff, if you're Missouri, Brady Cook's development is a big reason why this team may not miss a beat next year and may end up making the 12-team playoff. It's going to have to be on his shoulders, and I think he's very capable of doing that.
Right. Well, if that's where Brady Cook is, I can't wait to see who's next.
I think you know who it is. That's Nico. I know he's unknown, but man, the upside is there. It was impressive to see how he handled the bowl game against Iowa. The moment wasn't too big. You saw the talent on display. Certainly, I would expect some ups and downs, but I think in this offense with the weapons that Tennessee could have, I think Nico's going to have a breakout season. I think he's also a big reason why. Same thing applies to Missouri. If the quarterback play is good, they could be in the college football playoff. So pencil me in as a believer of Nico, and I've got him at number 5 in my rankings.
Yeah, and you didn't mention it, but I assume it kind of goes without saying. But how much playing in Josh Heupel's system kind of led to this ranking for Nico?
No doubt about it. I think, and I hate to say like everything's about statistics and all that and metrics and all that, but it certainly doesn't hurt. I mean, he could put up some ridiculous numbers in this offense next year. And I think just you and I talked this season about the Tennessee offense and the way it played under Joe Milton. I think the passing game is going to be a lot better. I think Nico will be better at stretching the field. I think the just the down to down consistency and accuracy. So statistics will be there. I also think if you're thinking about like dark horses for the Heisman, he's going to have plenty of showcase games. So he's probably not saying he's going to win it. I'm just saying if you're looking for some long shots on the odds for next season, the stats and the games will be there as showcase for him.
Right, and to your point, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and argue that Joe Milton was like awesome or anything, but it's kind of funny the perception, and I think it has more to do with just the hype that a lot of people put on him. Completed 65% of his passes, 2,800 yards, 20 touchdowns, 5 picks. I mean, if that's a down quarterback in this system.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pretty damn good, you know?
I think Milton was probably to some extent a victim of his own success in the Orange Bowl, where that's the outlier in his career, and he's probably been closer to what we saw this season, which was solid. But I think the flip side of that is if you're Tennessee, like Nico in this offense could be a lot closer to what Hendon Hooker it was in terms of production and overall offensive scoring in this Josh Heupel led offense.
Right. All right. So I don't even know if we have to continue anymore. We got Nico, but is anyone possibly better than Nico?
I've got 4 quarterbacks here that I am penciling in for All-America consideration right off the bat. Number 4, I've got Jackson Dart. Obviously, I think was looking for him to take a step forward from 2022 to 2023. I thought he did that. 3rd in the SEC in total offense, cut down on the interceptions. The completion percentage was better. Yards per attempt was solid. Everything you wanted to see as a second-year starter in this offense, I think you saw. Obviously, no Quinshad Judkins next year, so it will be even more on his shoulders. Ole Miss is a playoff contender. I think he looks very capable of doing so after taking a step forward this year.
Yeah, and the weapons, minus Judkins, of course, which they say, well, we'll just plug someone else in. He'll be just as good as the best player in the country. But, the receivers should be pretty good. Priest Corn was banged up a lot of the year. He was awesome in the bowl game. If it's Juice Wells of 2 years ago, he might be the best receiver in the country. Just add him to Trey Harris, who maybe he kind of reminds me of Chris Carter. Kind of dating myself with that reference, but all he does catch touchdowns. You know what I mean? Like he's going to have quite the weapons surrounding him.
And you would think after taking a jump from year 1 to year 2, year 2 to year 3, should be even more, I guess, profitable for him. He's more capable, I guess, of feeling more comfortable in the offense as a 3rd-year starter, plus the weapons. And so I think he had a breakout year this year, but I think next year, if Ole Miss wants to make the playoff, obviously it's defensive improvement, but they've got to get Dart to take it up one more notch and stay in that 10-2 type range to make the playoff.
So number 3, Arch Manning?
Quint.
Oh,
close.
Okay. No.
Yeah, close. I've got Quinn Ewers of Texas. So basically pencil in Texas starting quarterback somewhere at the 3, 4, and 5. As of right now, Ewers has not declared for the NFL draft. So I'm assuming he's going to come back kind of in the same mold of Jackson Dart. Like he took a step forward from last year to this year. Can he do that again next season? The averaged about 290 passing yards a game. I did think in the Sugar Bowl, he could have played a little bit better. So I think overall the question here is kind of, again, can Ewers take a step forward and join the elite of college football? Because he's probably somewhere in the top 10 to 15 at this point. But there's another gear that he should be able to make as a 5-star recruit.
And let me know if this is maybe an unfair question, Stephen, but has he lived up to the hype? Because I need to go back and really watch Texas a little bit closer. But now obviously, he had a heck of a game against Alabama, and there was Heisman buzz after that. I know he missed a couple games this year, right? So injuries, I think, have been a thing with him. But again, maybe we need to stop hyping up these guys based on the recruitings and on all that, because I think 24/7 Sports had him as like a perfect prospect for whatever. That's worth nothing on the field or anything. But I don't know. What's your thoughts? I mean, and I guess kind of tied with that, Stephen. I mean, is it remotely possible that he's not the starting quarterback? Like, because we've not seen anything from March. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on all that?
I don't know that he's necessarily played up to the potential maybe we thought there was coming out of high school. Like it does feel like there's another level that he can get to. I mean, he was 17th in the country in quarterback rating this year. He did miss some time. He's missed time both seasons, but I think he was better from last year to this year, and I think that's a positive sign. But I do think I expected a little bit more based upon, like you said, the recruiting hype. The one challenge I think that Texas is going to have to navigate next year is Jatavian Sanders has gone to the NFL, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell. Speaking of someone who always catches touchdowns in the playoff, A.D. Mitchell, the supporting cast is a little bit in flux. I think they're going to be fine, but as far as the Arch Manning thing, I tend to think it'll be Ewers unless he just struggles or goes to the NFL. If Manning beats him out in spring practice, then Texas is in even better shape at quarterback, because that would be a good sign for the Longhorns if Manning developed that much to unseat a top 15 quarterback nationally.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're down to the top two, Stephen. I know who they are, but I don't know the order. Who you got number two?
I've got Jalen Milroe at number two. I will say I debated Milroe, Ewers, Jackson Dart pretty extensively. I like the development of Jalen Milroe this season. I think he got a lot better just from game 1 to game 13. Obviously fell short in the playoff. Dynamic playmaker. Got some room to improve as far as the intermediate stuff. He led the SEC with a average depth of target, which is about 13.4 yards. So we know the big play stuff is there. You'd like to see the rest of it come together. But I thought overall breakout season, got a lot better. Big reason why Alabama made the playoff this year. So Jalen Milroe is 2.
Are you surprised at all that a lot of people have jumped on it? I mean, I'm seeing it in the comments. I mean, they're like offended that I said he's better than Jackson Dart. I mean, this is a guy that finished 6th in the Heisman, outplayed Beck in the SEC championship, outdueled Jaden Daniels, who won the Heisman. So many. I mean, he won him the A&M game with his arm. Second half, Tennessee won him the game. Yeah, he played one of his worst games, if not probably. Yeah, I know Texas was pretty bad, but he played one of his worst games. Michigan, biggest stage. I get all that, but is it just fandom, Stephen? Because it's Alabama fans calling him out too. But are you surprised by that? And now he sucks and he can't play college football, and Alabama may need to move on. Are you surprised we're seeing those reactions?
A little bit. Gravedigger wasn't that long ago. It was November 25th. I mean, that was a pretty good play, right?
Well, I think even the Georgia game is even.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't beat Georgia. They don't touch Georgia without Jalen Milroe.
I mean, go back when you watch that SEC championship game. I mean, the offense for Alabama, especially the passing game, took a while to come in. But when it did, it was the timely plays of Milroe that got the job done. I mean, Georgia's defense, as we know, is pretty dang good here. So there's no shame in only throwing for 92 yards against that defense. So I think maybe the hard part is your last game is probably the perception that we have.
Right.
And he wasn't great against Michigan, but I think we also have to give Michigan's defense a lot of credit to that. They played well that day. They're one of the best in the country. Alabama's got some offensive line issues. Obviously, they're going to have to sort out. So maybe I'm looking at it more from the outside, and I see the overall growth and development this season from Milroe. Certainly don't think by any means he's a finished product, and he could certainly get a lot better too.
Well, by that logic, Michael Penix sucks too.
Right.
Who I was,
Yeah.
people were saying he might be better than Joe Burrow. You know what I mean? Like, just against, I mean, it's just wild. I mean, I thought I had a wild swing of reactions, but I mean, the fact that they didn't completely shut down Penix, but they was that worse? I don't know if that's the right word, but was that his least productive game of the season?
Yeah, I think maybe that's the takeaway here is that we're sitting here talking about Milroe and Penix, two of the quarterbacks who probably were top. Penix was certainly top 3 or 4 most of the season. Milroe got onto the radar for top 10, top 15 nationally, and they both struggled against Michigan. They had two of their
Right.
worst games of the year against Michigan. There's a common denominator of Michigan's defense. So, and which gets at the point too, is like, I won't, if you tell me Milroe's got to get a lot better at this, and this, and you still have some doubts, I'm not going to disagree with you at all. I just think that from where Alabama was, watching a very sad Nick Saban walk into the locker room in a rain soaked game against South Florida to winning the SEC championship, a lot of that is Jalen Milroe.
All right. So then obviously number one, Carson Beck. What put Beck over the top for you?
I think just really impressive debut season. You know, he led the SEC in passing yards, overall just growth during the year. We saw it in the game against Auburn. It was sort of the kind of coming of ages moment for him as the starter. So I was impressed with his debut. Next year, no Brock Bowers, so will be a little bit more challenging. But I just think great debut season. Statistically, it'll be there. I think he can get even better in year 2 under Mike Bobo.
Yeah, again, another classic one of year two in the system. He's waited his turn, so he's a little bit of a unicorn these days in college football. Most players don't wait their turn anymore, but it certainly served him well there in Athens. You know, that was kind of the big unknown with Georgia heading into last season. I mean, we forget so quickly. He ate Stetson Bennett, and then halfway through the season, my God, he's better than Stetson Bennett. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
that was the narrative in it because he clearly is. I don't know if he's better than Stetson, but a better arm, I think it goes without saying.
Oh, no question about it. Yeah, I would agree. Definitely a better arm, a more live arm on Carson Beck. And plus, too, I mean, just the stat sheet is not everything, but the fact that he completed almost 73% of his throws, averaged 9.5 yards per attempt, and threw 6 picks as a first-year starter is pretty dang impressive. And I know Georgia's got a strong supporting cast, but this is week in and week out in the SEC. Developed quickly was the question, like you said, and eventually became a Heisman kind of fringe candidate by November.
Right. So again, I know we're going a little bit long here, Stephen. We don't have to go super long, but you also brought a reason for optimism for every SEC team as we turn the page to 2024. Can't wait to hear that because some of these fans, Stephen, they need it. What can you sell them on?
Hey, I'm an optimistic guy by nature when it comes to college football teams. I try to, we got to try and find something, right, to be optimistic about. So I'll start with Georgia. I'll tell you, I'll use my early power rankings 1 through 16. I'll kind of go through a few and I'll throw it back to you, and you can tell me if I'm being Mr. Negative or Mr. Positive here. Georgia. Carson Beck is back. We know the defense is great, and Trevor Etienne is coming into Georgia. This is the best team in the nation on paper. I don't know if Georgia fans need that optimism, but that's my reason if I was a Georgia fan to be optimistic. Alabama at 2 wasn't Nick Saban's best team, but they made the college football playoff. I think you got to think Milroe will get better. Obviously, the roster talent isn't going anywhere in Tuscaloosa, so a lot of reasons there to think Alabama will be a championship contender. Texas at 3, trend line. They're just getting better every year under Sarkisian. They made the playoff. We saw Michigan fall short and win it. Maybe Texas is the next team after falling short to win it. Obviously, lots of young talent, one of the better quarterback situations in the country. At 4, got Ole Miss in my early power rankings. Jackson Dart plus transfers on defense equals a team that should be able to make the 12-team playoff. So that's the top 4, Mike. Am I being too optimistic, or do I need to be a little bit more Mr. Negative here?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think I've been Mr. Decaying Dynasty for Alabama. Heck, they won the SEC championship. And I'm just trying to think. Now, obviously, I didn't study Michigan like you did, but clearly gave the national champions, took them to the wire. And if not for a god awful play there at the very end, may have beaten them, which they would have. I think they would have killed Washington. So, I mean, we're talking up, and I think they're just going to get better because I don't think they could. I've never seen a Nick Saban team, play as like they did at South Florida. I mean, that was awful.
Right.
So yeah, I think they're better. Kirby's an animal. You didn't mention him. I mean, I think he is. I hear he's a great dad, but I can't imagine he's got time for his wife and his children. The way he runs that program is just like, driven to win it every day. I would push back a little bit on Texas. Just again, I'm trying to butter them up, trying to welcome them to the SEC, but I'm still not sold on Sarkisian. He did beat Alabama at Alabama. I think that was. People say Georgia, Alabama, that was the most impressive win of the season. I think it was Texas going into Tuscaloosa and whipping Bama. That was the most impressive game of the season, I thought. But I don't know. It's a different animal in the SEC. So I'm not saying you're going to be irrelevant, but you're not going to run through it like you did. You just did and you didn't even run through the Big 12. You lost to Oklahoma. So I'm a little cautious there, but. Yeah, there's no reason for any pessimism in Ole Miss other than targets on your back now. Expectations. You never had it quite like this. We were all saying this could be a heck of a team, but they got to go to Bama. They got to go to Georgia. Let's just overlook them because they're not going to be a factor. And they, in fairness, they really weren't for the SEC, but 11 wins, one hell of a season. And I think anything short of that is going to be a disappointment next year.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the expectations are very, very high. And anything short of making the 12-team playoff and winning double digits is probably going to be a disappointment. I think, I know you didn't ask me about the Quinshad Judkins thing, but I do think it is a little bit of a setback. I mean, you could sell all you want about running backs are replaceable to me, and I get it. I think Quinshad Judkins is pretty dang special, though. And all the off-season optimism, all that, you sort of lose some of that when you lose one of your best players. But that may not be enough to knock them out of the 12-team playoff mix. I think they're just defensive improvement plus Jackson Dart's development at quarterback should keep him in it.
Yeah, and I love the fact that Stephen, all these people say, well, we devalue running backs now. Like the NFL has warped everyone's mind. I'm not saying give Judkins an 8-year, $100 million contract. I get it. But is Derrick Henry more valuable than Ryan Tannehill? Yes. They gave the money to Tannehill and everyone got fired. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference here. That's the perfect comp. You know what I mean? Like Jackson Dart's a nice player. Judkins, nationally elite. And he went right away to Ohio State. He's going to be their feature running back now. You know what I mean? Like, you just lost a star player to a national championship contender. So, I don't know. I don't care about NFL salaries and contracts and all that. It does not devalue a truly elite player. I mean, Alabama rode Derrick Henry to the national championship. Ole Miss won't be able to do that now. They're going to have to find a different way to do it with Judkins off that team. And don't sell me on Bentley's better. I mean, my God. I mean, they're going, yeah. He's a good player, but they're going that low to try to rationalize, letting him go.
You think Michigan was pretty happy to have Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards in the national championship game Monday night?
They were the difference in winning that game.
Yeah, like I said, I get the whole running back devalued thing, but there's certain special players I think I try to find a way to keep in house if I can. But
well, we're trying to be optimistic, and then we're just trashing them. So let's get back to positivity here, Steven.
Yeah, let's get back to positivity. Talk about those Missouri Tigers. A lot of optimism there, a lot of positivity in 2023. I think this is another trend line discussion. We kind of wondered where they were coming into this year. They won 11 games. Brady Cook, Theo Wease, Luther Burden are all back. Also, I think some question marks about defense, offensive line losses. Also, bringing in talent from the portal and the high school ranks. So I think if you're Missouri, it's a case of good core, also reinforcements on the way. At number 6, I've got Tennessee. One word, Nico. Do we need any more? That's all. That's all you need if you're a Tennessee fan. That Citrus Bowl highlights will probably carry Tennessee fans all the way up until the spring game, and then he can have some other ridiculous play in there that keeps us talking all off season. At number 7, I've got Oklahoma. I think the biggest reason for optimism ought to be Jackson Arnold, like his development over the off season. Also, if you're Oklahoma, I think you have a head coach who understands line of scrimmage and defense. I don't think Lincoln Riley would have put as much of an emphasis on that if he was the head coach. Going into the SEC, Oklahoma, I think, is in a much better spot than they were last season, and maybe even if Lincoln Riley was the head coach. So I think if you're Oklahoma, optimism, you've got the right guy as you go into a much tougher conference. At number 8, I've got LSU, Blake Baker. Big time hire, big time money, expecting big time results next season. I think he's the right hire for that LSU defense. And obviously, Garrett Nussmeier taking over for Jaden Daniels. If you're losing the Heisman winner, at least you got to feel pretty good about your backup quarterback stepping into that role in Garrett Nussmeier. So too optimistic, not enough optimistic, Mike?
No, I think this is and we kind of, I don't want to rehash exactly the conversation, but last week when we talked about it, all these teams, they're not all projected as playoff contenders, and they're not all going to make it next year. But I think the expectation for fans of all these is we can make the playoff if things break right. So optimistic abound, I think, with all those. You said Nico, and I get it. That is the key reason for Tennessee. But James Pierce, I think he is a reason too, because he could be the most dynamic defensive player in the SEC next year. I don't think it's not a guarantee, but I don't think that's too unrealistic either. So, I mean, an absolute game wrecker, Mizzou, Williams, and Awari. A lot of people number one deep. It's hard to come in and be day one impact, particularly on the line of scrimmage. But if he is what they're saying he is, and I'm not saying he's like Jadeveon Clowney, but that's what the recruiting rankings say. So if he could, and they don't need him to be Clowney, but if he could come in and make a handful of Clowney type plays next season, could be the difference. Getting a big win over, they play Alabama, teams like of that nature. So there's a lot to like about Mizzou. I mean, this is the best time I can ever remember being a Mizzou fan, I have to believe. Oklahoma, you talk about Jackson Arnold. That I didn't realize till that bowl game, Stephen, that I think his name's Nick Anderson, freshman receiver. He's got more touchdowns than any Oklahoma receiver ever after 1 year. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Speaking of the Chris Carter reference, works really well for Nick Anderson, by the way.
Yeah, and he's actually got a podcast. I checked it out. I mean, they're letting him do it like right in front of the national championships that they have there in Oklahoma. It puts mine to shame, the setup they have down there. So go check that out if you're a Sooner fan. You'll like it. I caught it. They interviewed Jackson Arnold. I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, a lot to like. I got to be honest with you, Stephen, after a off season of touting LSU, again, I'm trying not to be negative here, but I'm kind of selling my LSU stock right now. And that's after winning 20 games in 2 years. So I'm not saying they're going to be awful, but I don't know. I just feel like we're at a crossroads here with LSU. I need to see something here, because I feel like we took a little bit of a step back this year, even though that's crazy to say. We just won 10 games, had a Heisman Trophy winner, but I expected more from LSU than what we got outside of the outstanding play that was Jaden Daniels.
Especially in the SEC West, where if you believe that this was not one of Nick Saban's better teams, that should have been the door was wide open for LSU to win it again. Maybe they wouldn't have made the college football playoff, but they certainly, the West was there for the taking, and they just regressed massively on defense. So yeah, I would agree with you in the sense of that I don't know whether crossroads are sort of like breaking point for Brian Kelly, but it does feel like this is an important offseason for this team. And it's also an important offseason for the next team. I have it number 9, which is Texas A&M. It's kind of the same thing, which is prove it to us. There's a lot of potential here. If you're looking for reasons for optimism for A&M, I think it's pretty clear. Like, you hire Mike Elko, great hire. You've got a quarterback in Connor Wigman that could be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC. They've added a ton of guys in the transfer portal. So A&M, I think, will be one of those teams that everybody this offseason is going to talk about. They haven't won. They failed to reach expectations. Well, I think they got the right coach in, and I think there's a chance they surprise some people next year. So I think LSU and A&M is kind of a good tandem there at 8 and 9. At 10, I've got Kentucky, and I think obviously the reason for optimism is the transfer portal, potential starting quarterback, potential running back. You've got two dynamic receivers in Barry and Brown and Dane Key, a little bit more consistency overall offensively, and this group could take off with Vandergriff. Also, I think maybe a little bit of trust that Stoops and Brad White can fix the defense after not being great against the pass this season. Number 11, got Auburn. I think easy to make a case that talent is on the rise. They brought in 15 blue chip players this year. I would say it's 4 and 5-star recruits. That's the most since 2020. So they're bringing in talent. They have to do a better job of developing and putting it in the right scheme. But the talent's getting better, potentially some other additions as we go into the offseason. Maybe this team takes another step forward. And that's also true with the number 12 team in Florida. I basically just wrote down Aaron Childs, Miles Graham, LJ McCray, DJ Lagway. Like, all of those high 4 and 5-star impact potential recruits. It's an important year for Napier. It's the recruiting trail that's probably the biggest reason for optimism for Florida.
Yeah, and all those programs, I would argue, even Kentucky, with their elevated expectations, they want to see playoffs in the near future, not next year or heads will roll, not that, but I think all of them have those playoff aspirations, if that makes sense. The one thing, the most optimistic, you didn't even mention it with A&M. Jimbo's gone.
Yeah.
So it's automatically an upgrade. I don't care who they hired. And that's kind of the same deal with Kentucky. The dominoes nearly cost you your coach. I know I've given Mark Stoops a hard time, fairly, I think. But I think he's perfect for Kentucky. Blue collar, tough, culture strong. There's always at least 1 or 2 Saturdays a year that you're damn proud to be a Kentucky fan with Mark Stoops there. His team's never quit. So, yeah, I think the future's bright with both those two. And Auburn, clean house with your coordinators. So I guess that's good. I don't know, but it better be good. Otherwise, Hugh Freeze's going to have some tough questions he's going to have to answer. You know what?
Or just fire the coordinators again. Maybe that's the play. You fire your offensive coordinator, take over play calling duties, and then the next year you hire an offensive coordinator because the offense wasn't good, so you're just buying yourself more time. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think as we go into the last 4 teams on this list, it gets a little harder to make like the case for optimism for some of these teams. But also, I think like all these teams could be bowl teams if things break right. Like even. I hate to say it, like Vanderbilt, if everything broke right next year, they could maybe find a way to get to 6 victories. But when you look at South Carolina, who I've got 13 in the early SEC power rankings, I think it's pretty simple. Like, they've added a lot of good impact transfers. I mentioned Jared Brown, Rocket Sanders. They've added guys, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, plus Lenora Sellers. Like, if he's as good as we've seen at times, there's no reason that South Carolina couldn't finish closer to 10 on this list next year. Arkansas 14, I think it's Bobby Petrino. If he can fix the offense, then Arkansas's got a chance to be much improved. One pickup to keep an eye on is JaQuindon Jackson. He's a transfer from Utah. He actually started as a quarterback at Texas, transferred to Utah, played running back. if you go back to the end of 2022, it looked like he was going to become one of the Pac-12's better running backs. He got banged up. Offensive line for Utah wasn't great last year. I think keep an eye on him. I think he could be a guy that has, maybe he's going to fly a little bit under the radar, but there's that potential to take a big step forward as a productive running back for Arkansas. So I keep an eye on Jaquindon Jackson. Mississippi State at 15, I think new era of football. You hired a coach in Jeff Lebby who's got a track record of producing high-powered offenses. The transfers coming in, there's the chance to get a lot better right away. Kind of the same thing for Vanderbilt too. Clark Lee, the rebuilding process has been slow. Progress has been hard to find. Maybe the aggressive approach and going into the portal and getting some guys is enough to show some improvement next year. So that would be, I know we had to reach a little bit on the case for optimism for some of those, but Mike, feel free. If I'm Mr. Negative or Mr. Positive here.
Well, you know what is unique about all those teams you referenced there at the end, Stephen, is in a league of expectations, largely unfair expectations, expectations are low with, I think, all those, which, the coaches probably don't want it that way for obvious reasons because they're coming off some rough seasons. But, hey, it's not often where you have that, where you can kind of be laying in the weeds, pressure off to an extent in terms of expectations. So I think that's a reason for optimism for all those. Now, you don't want to be there for long because apathy is the worst thing you can have. But just quietly get to work, have people. I certainly think some of those Arkansas, South Carolina expectations, the burden of that has been felt, and even Vanderbilt. I mean, hell, Clark Lee, bowl game or bust, he said. And I thought that was the right message at the time because they had shown progress at the end of 2022. Yet, probably should have been preaching, hey, let's pump the brakes here.
Yeah. I think what you said there was spot on because I think if I'm South Carolina, the end of the 2022 season may have clouded our judgment a bit on 2023 because of how many personnel questions and the tough schedule they had. And so, yeah, they finished 5-7, but they had a difficult schedule. They had a ton of injuries. This year, there's really not expectations right now. I think a small step forward would be like 6-6, 7-5. It would probably be, it's pretty reasonable. So I think if you're South Carolina, there's no expectation on the end of the season like you had going in from 22 to 23, especially with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. They were getting some preseason buzz to be a top 25 team. And I think for Arkansas, kind of the same thing. I mean, I worry a little bit about apathy setting in at the end of last season for Arkansas, but I think the Petrino hire combined with some of the portal additions, maybe there's a little bit of that going away. And honestly, like there's not a ton of expectations for Arkansas. I don't think anybody maybe outside the state of Arkansas expects them to be, much higher than maybe 10th or 11th in the SEC next season, but there's also an opportunity. I mean, they just went out and hired Petrino. They nailed the Travis Williams hire last year. The defense was better. So low expectations could translate into good things for some of these teams because they could sneak up on somebody. Same thing for Mississippi State. No one's expecting this team to be 8-4 next year, so they could surprise in some regard.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is not what those fans want to hear, Stephen, but like a 7-5, like let's say South Carolina, which let's say they beat Clemson and they got this young team and they find a way in the bowl game. And then we're sitting here saying, man, we just won 8 games and we got all these guys coming back for year 2. I mean, I think that's what you got to be building towards. Not like, can we make the playoff? Come on. You know what I mean? Like, there's 12 teams now. You know what I mean? Like, that reasonable expectations at times, I think, can hinder you or can help as opposed to hinder you, which I think really did this year.
Yeah, and especially if you look at the way the SEC could shake out, where 9 or 10 teams could be in the top 25. I mean, certainly, I think LSU at 8 and Texas A&M at 9. I mean, A&M is probably going to be a fringe top 25 team by most people. You're talking about over half of the league is in the top 25. And then you throw in Kentucky, Auburn, Florida, who could be in like in the 30s or high 40s. So, man, it's a very unforgiving league, and progress might be hard to come by, but progress might be a win or two. But that's also good enough to get South Carolina back in a bowl game next year, too.
Right. All right, Stephen. Well, hey, we've hit on a number of topics. We even talked the video game and the playoffs, and hit on every SEC team a couple times. You got anything else before you head out?
Man, we hit it all today, didn't we? That was, I think, hey, the best part about it is we talked some college football, we talked some optimism, and man, after the last college football game, I think we're all going to need that for a while, aren't we?
Yeah, it's the dark days. I mean, it's miserable out here with the weather. It's like they knew that college football has come to an end. Now we're into the darkness of the off season, and hopefully this brings a little sunshine to SEC fanatics that may desperately need it right now. You know what?
Absolutely. I think Big Ten weather is invading us here in SEC country the next couple of weeks, man. Man, I guess everything's coming up Michigan in the Big Ten right now, right?
Yep. Well, I appreciate you, Stephen. Before you go, as always, can you tell the audience how can they follow you? How can they find your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, thanks for having me, Mike. You can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Steven. You can check out all my work, all CFB 365 on YouTube. And you can check me out on the Cover 2 podcast by Athlon Sports. We come out every Wednesday talking all things college football.